I leaned against the counter of the gas station, watching the minutes crawl by on the ancient wall clock above the coffee maker. 3 nights into my new job, and the silence of rural South Dakota at night was getting to me. 20 miles from anything resembling civilization, Highway 14 stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of black cutting through nowhere. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting that sickly glow that made everything look worse than it actually was. My reflection in the glass door looked haunted already, eyes sunken from adjusting to night shifts, my gas station vest hanging loose over my t-shirt. "These are non-negotiable," Rebecca had told me during orientation, sliding a handwritten list across the counter. Not guidelines, not suggestions. Rules for survival. Rebecca Palmer was the day manager, a woman who'd clearly seen too many years of retail. The lines on her face told stories of customer complaints and overnight shifts. When she spoke about the rules, her expression turned deadly serious, which seemed ridiculous for a gas station job. I picked up the paper and read through it again now, smirking at how dramatic it all seemed. 1. No fuel sales between 2 to 4 a.m. Lock the pumps. 2. Never let the dog inside, no matter how much it begs. 3. Serve the man in the blue suit quickly and without conversation. 4. Never look at the back wall after midnight. 5. Do not answer or acknowledge the payphones. "Is this some kind of hazing ritual?" I'd asked Rebecca. "Scare the new guy?" She hadn't smiled. "I need verbal confirmation that you understand each rule, Thomas." "I understand," I'd said, trying not to roll my eyes. No gas at weird hours, no pets allowed, special treatment for fancy customers. Don't stare at walls. Ignore obsolete technology. Got it. "This isn't a joke," she'd said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "People who break these rules don't come back for their next shift." I'd nodded along, assuming it was all part of some elaborate prank on the new guy. Small towns had weird traditions, and I figured this was just their way of making the job seem more interesting than it was. For the first 2 nights, I'd played along. The overnight shift at a rural gas station was boring enough that I welcomed any kind of mystery to keep me awake. I'd even made a game of it, staring at the back wall just before midnight, then dramatically turning away when the clock struck 12. Nothing happened, of course. The 3rd night started like the others. I arrived at 10, and Rebecca spent 15 minutes going through the handover. Cash register balanced, coffee fresh. Hot dogs rotating slowly on their heated rollers. She asked me, as she had every night, if I had any questions about the rules. "All good," I assured her, though I'm starting to think the blue suit guy is standing us up. Rebecca didn't laugh. "You'll meet him eventually, everyone does." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Remember, Thomas, the rules are for survival, I know." She nodded and left, her car kicking up gravel as she pulled out of the parking lot. And then I was alone, 20 miles from anyone who might hear me scream. I chuckled at the thought. This place was getting to me. The first hour passed like the previous nights. I restocked the candy aisle, wiped down the coffee station, and rang up a trucker buying energy drinks and beef jerky. By 11, the highway was empty, and I settled in with my phone, checking social media to pass the time. That's when it happened. The ringing startled me so badly, I dropped my phone on the counter. The sound came from the back corner of the store, where 2 payphones hung on the wall next to the bathrooms. I'd noticed them before. Relics from another era, their silver cords frayed and yellowed with age. The ringing continued, insistent and jarring in the quiet store. I stood frozen behind the counter, remembering Rebecca's voice. "Do not answer or acknowledge the payphones." I laughed nervously. "Very funny," I called out, assuming this was the prank finally playing out. Maybe Rebecca was outside with her cell phone, calling the payphone somehow. Or maybe David, the morning guy, had set up some kind of timer to freak me out. The ringing continued, unabated. I walked toward the beverage coolers, pretending to check stock while keeping an eye on the phones. They looked exactly as they had before, outdated and neglected. But one of the receivers was vibrating slightly with each ring. "Those things actually work?" I'd asked Rebecca during my first shift tour. "They haven't been connected for years," she'd said firmly. "The phone company removed the lines in 2015. If you hear them ring, refer to Rule 5. The ringing persisted, and I checked the time, 11:07 p.m. I tried to ignore it, moving to the magazine rack to reorganize the outdated publications nobody ever bought, but the sound grated on my nerves, like fingernails on a chalkboard. After 10 minutes, I was gritting my teeth. "This isn't funny anymore," I called out, louder this time. No response except the continued ringing. I looked out the windows at the empty parking lot. No cars hiding in the shadows, no sign of Rebecca or anyone else who might be pulling a prank. The cameras. I suddenly remembered the security system. I went behind the counter and checked the monitor that showed feeds from the 4 cameras positioned around the store. The parking lot was empty. The aisles were empty. The back corner showed the payphones ringing away with no one nearby. I felt a chill run down my arms. This was either an elaborate prank or... No. I refused to consider any other explanation. Gas stations in the middle of nowhere didn't have ghost phones or whatever this was supposed to be. I decided to check the phones. Rule or no rule, I needed to see what was happening. I approached slowly, watching the vibrating receiver. Up close, I could see a thick layer of dust on both phones, undisturbed except where the vibration had created small clear patches. My hand hovered near the receiver. What was the harm in answering? Worst case, I'd hear Rebecca laughing at me for falling for the joke. But something made me hesitate. The air around the phones felt wrong somehow, colder than it should be. And looking at them up close, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Small scratches in the metal around the coin slots, as if something with claws had been trying to get in. I backed away, the rule suddenly feeling less like a joke and more like a warning. The phones rang for exactly 30 minutes, stopping abruptly at 11:30. The sudden silence felt almost as jarring as the ringing had been. I stood in the middle of the store, listening to the hum of the refrigerators and my own breathing. I felt watched, not by the security cameras, by something else. My eyes darted to the back wall with its employee schedule and faded safety posters. Nothing unusual there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was looking back at me. The rest of my shift passed with agonizing slowness. I kept glancing at the payphones, half expecting them to start ringing again. They remained silent, ordinary pieces of outdated technology gathering dust in a forgotten corner. By the time dawn approached, I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing, or that it had been some kind of electrical malfunction. Almost. David Rodriguez arrived at 6, his truck pulling into the gravel lot as the sky lightened. He was in his early 30s, with perpetual stubble and tired eyes that suggested he understood the toll of working retail. "How was the night shift?" he asked, hanging his jacket on the hook behind the counter. "Quiet," I said, then added, "except for the payphones. They rang for half an hour straight." David's reaction was immediate and disturbing. His face drained of color, and he stopped midway through entering his employee code into the register. "You didn't answer them, did you?" His voice was tight, barely above a whisper. "No," I said, watching his face carefully. "Rule 5, right?" Relief washed over him. "Good. That's good." He turned back to the register, punching in the rest of his code with slightly shaky fingers. "So, what's the deal with the phones?" I pressed. "Rebecca said they're disconnected." "They are." David busied himself with counting the register, not meeting my eyes. "Then how—" "Look, Thomas," he cut me off, finally looking up. "The rules exist for a reason. That's all you need to know. But trust me, you don't want explanations." His tone left no room for argument. "Just follow the rules, okay? All of them." He turned away, starting the coffee maker for the morning rush. The conversation was clearly over. I gathered my things, puzzled and unsettled by his reaction. It confirmed what I'd started to suspect during those 30 minutes of ringing. There was something fundamentally wrong with this place. The rules weren't a joke or a hazing ritual. They meant something. As I walked to my car, I looked back at the gas station. In the early morning light, it looked perfectly ordinary, just a shabby convenience store on a lonely stretch of highway. But now I knew better. Behind its fluorescent-lit windows, something strange was happening, and I had somehow become part of it. I pulled into the gravel lot of the gas station for my 4th night shift, cutting the engine and sitting in silence for a moment. David's reaction to the phone incident kept replaying in my mind. The color had drained from his face so quickly, his hands shaking as he'd asked if I'd answered the call. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't a joke. The fluorescent lights inside cast their sickly glow through the windows, making the empty store look even more isolated against the pitch-black South Dakota night. I grabbed my lunch from the passenger seat and headed inside, the gravel crunching under my boots. Rebecca was waiting behind the counter, organizing receipts. She looked up when the door chimed. "Right on time," she said, sliding the cash drawer shut. "Any questions about last night?" I hesitated. The payphones rang. Her expression didn't change. "And you followed Rule 5? "Yeah, I didn't answer them." She nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. The drawers counted. Coffee's fresh. The hot case is stocked and set to turn off at 2. She grabbed her purse from under the counter. "Anything else?" I wanted to ask about the phones, why they rang when they weren't connected, why David had looked so terrified. But something in her businesslike demeanor stopped me. Instead, I shook my head. "All good." Rebecca paused at the door. "Remember to lock the pumps at 1:45, not a minute later." "Got it." After she left, I settled in for another long night. The first few hours passed slowly. I had 2 customers before midnight, a local farmer buying cigarettes and a trucker filling his thermos with coffee. After they left, the highway fell silent again. I kept glancing at the payphones, but they remained quiet. My eyes also drifted to the back wall occasionally, remembering Rule 4, never look at the back wall after midnight. Such a strange, specific rule. What could possibly be dangerous about a wall? The hours ticked by. I cleaned the coffee station, mopped the floors, and reorganized the candy aisle for the 2nd time in 2 days. Anything to keep busy. At 1:43, my phone alarm buzzed. I'd set a reminder about the pumps after Rebecca's pointed comment. Walking to the register, I pressed the button that shut down the fuel system for the night. The pumps outside went dark, their displays fading to black. I still didn't understand the point of this rule. Why shut down the pumps during what should be normal operating hours? We were the only gas station for 20 miles. What if someone ran out of gas between 2 and 4 in the morning? Around 2:05, movement outside caught my eye. A car had pulled up to pump 3, a dark sedan that I hadn't heard arrive. A man in a gray suit stepped out and tried to activate the pump. When nothing happened, he looked toward the store, then walked to the door. He knocked on the glass, his face partially shadowed. I pointed to the sign on the door that listed our fuel hours. "Sorry," I called through the glass. "No gas until 4. The man knocked again, harder this time. Something about him seemed off. His suit looked slightly wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing it for days. And his face. I couldn't quite focus on his features. They seemed to shift in the fluorescent lighting like I was looking at him through water. "I can't turn the pumps back on," I said louder, remembering the first rule. "Company policy." He pressed his face closer to the glass, and I took an instinctive step back. His features seemed to move independently of each other. His eyes too wide, his mouth stretching at an impossible angle. I blinked, and he looked normal again. Just a businessman annoyed about the pumps being off. The knocking grew more insistent. The man's knuckles rapped against the glass in a rhythm that seemed deliberately designed to set my teeth on edge. I turned away, pretending to busy myself with the register. The knocking continued, growing louder and more aggressive with each passing minute. When I glanced back, the man was still there, but now his hand was flat against the glass, fingers splayed wide. His fingers looked too long, the joints bent at unnatural angles. I swallowed hard, remembering David's face when I'd mentioned the phones. This had to be connected to the rules somehow. The man in the gray suit wasn't just an annoyed customer. He was something else entirely. The knocking turned to pounding, hard enough that I worried the glass might crack. I moved to the back of the store, putting distance between myself and the door. From there, I could see the man's whole body pressed against the glass, his suit now looking oddly loose, as if it were several sizes too big. For nearly 2 hours, the pounding continued. I stayed away from the windows, trying to focus on restocking shelves with shaking hands. Every few minutes, I checked the security cameras. The man remained at the door, sometimes pounding, sometimes just standing perfectly still with his face pressed against the glass. The stillness was somehow worse than the pounding. At exactly 4 o'clock, the pounding stopped. The sudden silence was jarring after the constant noise. I cautiously approached the front, looking at the security monitor first. The screen showed an empty parking lot. The man was gone. I walked to the door and peered outside. The sedan was nowhere to be seen. The gravel where he had stood showed no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I hurried to the register and reactivated the pumps, my hands still trembling. For the next hour, I jumped at every small noise, the refrigerator cycling on, the ice machine dropping a fresh batch, the building settling. I kept expecting the man to reappear, but the parking lot remained empty until 5 o'clock. I was wiping down the coffee counter when a soft scratching sound came from the front door. Looking up, I saw an old German shepherd standing outside, its paws against the glass. The dog looked thin, its ribs visible through its dull coat. It whined, a high, desperate sound that carried through the glass. Rule 2 flashed in my mind. Never let the dog inside, no matter how much it begs. The dog scratched at the door again, its eyes fixed on me. It looked so pitiful, clearly hungry, possibly lost or abandoned. My first instinct was to grab some of the hot dogs from the roller grill and take them outside for it. But Rebecca's words echoed in my head. The rules are for survival, not guidelines or suggestions. Survival. The dog whined again, louder this time. It paced back and forth in front of the door, occasionally standing on its hind legs to press its paws against the glass. Its eyes never left mine. I can't, I said out loud, feeling ridiculous talking to a dog through a locked door. I'm sorry. The animal tilted its head, as if it understood my words. Then it sat down directly in front of the door, still staring at me. I turned away, feeling cruel. It was just a dog. What possible harm could come from letting it inside, or at least feeding it? But then I remembered the man in the gray suit, how his features had seemed to shift and distort. Nothing about this place was normal. The rules existed for a reason, David had said. I decided to trust that. For the remainder of my shift, the dog circled the building, appearing at different windows, scratching at the glass. Sometimes it would disappear for 10 or 15 minutes, then reappear at another door or window. Around 5:30, it began to howl. Long, mournful sounds that made the hair on my arms stand up. The howling continued on and off until the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn. Each time I heard that sound, I questioned whether I was being heartless or following necessary survival instructions. The dog looked so desperate, so genuinely in need, and yet something kept me from breaking the rule. Maybe it was the memory of David's pale face, or the unnatural way the man in the gray suit had disappeared without a trace. By the time David's truck pulled into the lot at 6, the dog was gone. I watched David walk from his truck to the door, scanning the parking lot for any sign of the German Shepherd. Nothing. Like the man in the gray suit, it had vanished completely. David entered, hanging his jacket on the hook behind the counter. "Morning," he said, his eyes scanning my face. "How was your shift?" I hesitated, unsure how much to share. The man in the gray suit showed up after I locked the pumps, and later there was a dog. David's hands froze in the middle of entering his code into the register. "Did you let either of them in?" "No," I said, "but the man, his face looked wrong, and he disappeared without a trace at exactly 4. David nodded slowly, visibly relieved. "And the dog?" "It circled the building all night, howling. It looked starved." "But you kept the doors locked?" "Yeah." "Good." David finished entering his code. "That's good. I wanted to ask more questions. What was the man in the gray suit? Why couldn't I let in a clearly suffering animal?" But David's tight expression told me I wouldn't get straight answers. As I gathered my things to leave, I glanced out at the now peaceful parking lot. In the early morning light, it was hard to believe what I'd witnessed during the night. The knocking man with the shifting face, the desperate dog circling the building. But I knew what I'd seen, and I was starting to understand that the rules weren't just arbitrary policies. They were warnings about things I couldn't yet comprehend. I couldn't get the image of the man in the gray suit out of my mind during my next shift. Something about his face kept coming back to me. The way it seemed to move and change under the store lights. How his fingers stretched too long against the glass. And that dog circling the building all night, looking at me with those knowing eyes. The night started normally enough. Rebecca did the handover at 10, counting out the drawer and walking me through the usual closing procedures. She paused before leaving, giving me that same serious look. "The rules kept you safe last night," she said, not asking but stating. "Remember that." After she left, I went through my normal routine. I stocked the coolers, wiped down the coffee station, and counted the cigarette inventory. Time crawled by, each minute marked by the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rumble of the refrigerators. No customers came in. The highway remained empty, a black ribbon stretching into darkness. The payphones stayed silent. By 2 a.m., I'd cleaned everything twice and organized the candy display 3 times. At 2:25, I moved behind the counter to restock the cigarettes. We kept them on shelves, built into the back wall, the same wall mentioned in Rule 4. As I arranged packs of Marlboros and Camels, I kept my back to the rest of the wall, focusing only on the small section where the cigarettes were stored. Rule 4 had been nagging at me since my first day. Never look at the back wall after midnight. It seemed so arbitrary, so specific. What could possibly be dangerous about a wall? It was just drywall and paint, covered with safety posters and the employee schedule. At 2:30, while putting the last carton in place, I felt it. A strange pull, like someone had grabbed the back of my shirt, except no one was there. The feeling wasn't physical but mental, an overwhelming urge to turn around, to look at the rest of the wall behind me. I gripped the edge of the counter. "No," I said out loud to the empty store. The urge grew stronger. My neck muscles tightened, trying to turn my head against my will. I closed my eyes, but that made it worse. With my vision blocked, my other senses heightened, and I could swear I heard breathing behind me. Slow, wet breathing like something with damaged lungs. I thought about Kevin Brown, the night clerk before me. David had gone pale when I'd mentioned the ringing phones. What would he say if he knew I was thinking about breaking Rule 4? But the pull was becoming impossible to resist. It felt like fighting sleep after being awake for days, a basic, primal need that overrode all rational thought. "It's just a wall," I whispered, trying to convince myself. "Just paint and plaster." My head began to turn, muscles acting almost independently of my will. I tried to focus on the cigarette display, the register, anything but the growing compulsion to look. When my head finally turned, it happened in slow motion. My eyes tracked across the surface of the wall, past the employee schedule with my name penciled in for night shifts, past the faded safety poster about proper lifting technique, toward the blank section of wall to the right of the bathroom doors. Something was there. At first it looked like a stain or a shadow, a slightly darker patch on the beige paint. But as I stared, the patch deepened, becoming three-dimensional, like the wall was melting inward. Then I saw the eyes. Black, dead eyes stared back at me from within the wall. Not painted or projected, but actually there, as if looking through a window from someplace else. They fixed on me with terrible awareness, recognizing me, seeing me. The wall around the eyes bulged outward now, forming the suggestion of a face, bone white and hairless, with skin that looked wet and slick under the fluorescent lights. Its mouth opened in what looked like a silent scream, revealing rows of teeth that reminded me of broken glass, jagged, translucent, and impossibly sharp. I couldn't look away. My body froze as the thing pushed farther into our world. The wall around it rippled like water, and a hand emerged, fingers too long and too thin, with extra joints that bent in impossible directions. The creature moved like it was swimming through the solid wall, pushing against some membrane between its world and mine. Its head came through first, that terrible pale face now fully formed and moving, those black eyes never blinking. More arms followed. Not two, but many, unfurling like pale spider legs from the rippling surface. My paralysis broke when those fingers stretched toward me, now only a few feet away. I stumbled backward, knocking over a display of lighters. They clattered to the floor, the sound snapping me fully back to reality. I ran. I didn't grab my jacket or my phone. I just ran, fumbling with my keys as I sprinted for the door. Behind me, I heard a wet, sliding sound like something heavy being pulled through mud. I burst outside into the cold night air, not bothering to lock the door behind me. My car was parked at the side of the building, and I ran to it with my heart pounding in my ears. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As I started the engine, I forced myself to look at the store. Through the front windows, I could see the counter where I'd been standing. The lights were still on, the store still open. But something moved in the shadows near the back wall. Something that didn't belong in our world. I put the car in gear and peeled out of the gravel lot, sending rocks flying. In my rearview mirror, the gas station shrank to a small, glowing box in the darkness, and then disappeared as I crested a hill. I drove home in a daze, my mind replaying what I'd seen. Those black eyes, those teeth, the way it moved through solid matter like it was nothing. I'd broken Rule 4, and now I knew why it existed. When I reached my apartment, I sat in the car for a long time, engine off, staring at nothing. I'd left the station completely unattended. The doors weren't locked, the register was open. Anyone could walk in, or anything. I should quit. No job was worth what I'd just seen. I could call Rebecca in the morning, tell her I was done, make up some excuse. But even as I thought it, I knew I wouldn't. Something kept me from reaching for my phone, from composing the text that would end my employment. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the memory of David's face when he'd asked if I'd answered the phones, that mix of fear and relief when I said I hadn't. Or maybe it was something else, a feeling that I'd crossed a line, seen something I wasn't supposed to see, and now I was part of whatever was happening at that lonely gas station on Highway 14. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the digital clock on my nightstand. 3 hours had passed since I'd run from the gas station. My heart still hammered in my chest whenever I thought about what I'd seen, That pale face emerging from the wall, those dead black eyes tracking me, those impossibly long fingers reaching out. My phone lay next to me, screen dark. I could pick it up right now, call Rebecca, and quit. Walk away from whatever nightmare was happening at that place. But I kept seeing her face in my mind, hearing her words. The rules are for survival. I'd broken one of those rules. I'd looked at the back wall after midnight. If I didn't go back to finish my shift, Rebecca would have questions. Questions I didn't want to answer. And maybe it was stupid. Maybe it was the worst idea I'd ever had. But I felt responsible. I needed to go back. To at least lock up properly. I changed into fresh clothes with shaking hands, splashed cold water on my face, and grabbed my car keys. Outside, the sky was still dark, but the faintest hint of gray touched the eastern horizon. Almost 6 a.m. David would be arriving for his shift soon. The drive back to the gas station felt both too long and too short. Every curve in the highway made my stomach clench with dread. What would I find? The place torn apart? That thing waiting for me? Maybe nothing at all, just an empty store with the lights still on, making me question whether I'd imagined the whole thing. When I finally crested the hill and saw the station in the distance, my foot eased off the gas pedal. From the outside, everything looked normal. The fluorescent lights glowed steadily through the windows. No broken glass, no signs of disturbance. I pulled into the gravel lot and parked, then sat with the engine running for several minutes. Through the windshield, I could see the empty store, looking exactly as it had when I fled. Just a normal gas station in the middle of nowhere. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence pressed in around me. "This is stupid," I whispered to myself. "Just go in, lock up, and wait for David." I got out of the car and approached the door slowly, keys clutched in my sweaty palm. The closer I got, the more my legs wanted to turn and run in the opposite direction. But I forced myself forward, step by step, until I reached the entrance. The door was still unlocked, just as I'd left it. I pushed it open, the familiar chime sounding impossibly loud in the quiet morning. The smell of coffee and cleaning supplies hit me. Normal smells, everyday smells. I stood just inside the doorway, scanning the interior. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The display of lighters I'd knocked over still lay scattered on the floor. The cigarette cartons behind the counter remained neatly arranged. The coffee pot sat half full on its warmer, and the back wall, it was just a wall, beige paint, safety posters, the employee schedule with my name penciled in for night shifts. No pale face, no reaching hands, no black, dead eyes watching me. I took a tentative step forward, then another. Nothing happened. The store remained quiet except for the hum of the refrigerators and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights. That's when I noticed the floor. A trail of muddy paw prints led from the front door to the counter, then back to the door again. The German Shepherd had been inside while I was gone. I rushed to the register, expecting to find it emptied. But the cash drawer was closed, untouched. I opened it and quickly counted. Every bill was still there, exactly as Rebecca had left it during yesterday's handover. I checked the security system next, rewinding the footage to when I'd fled. The camera that covered the front door showed me running out, then nothing but static for the next 3 hours. The same static filled all 4 camera feeds until about 20 minutes ago, when the picture suddenly cleared, showing an empty store. The camera that should have captured the back wall showed nothing unusual, just a normal wall with posters and schedules. No evidence of the creature I'd seen, no record of how the dog had gotten inside despite the locked doors. I paced the store, looking for any other signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place except for those muddy paw prints. Even the wall itself looked completely ordinary now, giving no hint of the horror that had emerged from it hours earlier. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the whole thing? But no. The knocked-over lighter display and the dog prints proved something had happened. Something real. At exactly 6, David's truck pulled into the parking lot. I watched him through the window as he climbed out, yawning and stretching. He looked so normal, so everyday that for a moment I almost convinced myself I could just pretend nothing had happened. Just do the handover like any other morning. But when he walked in and saw me, his expression changed immediately. His eyes widened, taking in my pale face and trembling hands. "You okay?" he asked, hanging his jacket on the hook. "You look like you've seen a..." He stopped himself mid-sentence. "Ghost?" I finished for him. David didn't smile. He glanced around the store, his eyes lingering on the muddy paw prints. "The dog got in?" I shook my head. "I don't know how. I wasn't here." He stared at me for a long moment, then gestured toward the break room. "Come on," he said quietly. "We need to talk." I followed him to the small room at the back of the store, my legs feeling wooden and unsteady. The break room was barely more than a closet, just a small table, 2 chairs, and a mini fridge. David closed the door behind us and sat down, motioning for me to take the other chair. "You looked at the wall, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. The directness of the question caught me off guard. I swallowed hard and nodded. David's expression turned grim. He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking much older than his 30-something years. "I figured as much. The way you look right now." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You're lucky, you know that? You're lucky you got out." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What came out of the wall?" "I don't know what it is," David said. "None of us do. It's just part of this place." He glanced toward the door as if making sure we were truly alone. Everyone who works here long enough eventually looks. The curiosity gets to be too much. "Did you?" He nodded slowly. 3 years ago, I'd been working mornings for about 8 months. One day I stayed late to help Rebecca with inventory. It was past midnight when we finished. She left, and I was alone. I knew the rule, but he shrugged. I thought it was stupid. Just another arbitrary policy. "What happened?" "Same thing that happened to you, I'm guessing. It came through, tried to grab me." His voice had taken on a flat, emotionless quality. "I ran. Didn't come back for 2 days. Rebecca found me at my apartment, told me I still had a job if I wanted it." "And you came back?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. "Yeah, I came back." He met my eyes. "Just like you did?" I hadn't thought about it that way. He was right. I had come back despite what I'd seen. Something about this place pulled us in, made us return even after witnessing the impossible. "What about the previous night clerk?" I asked. "Kevin something?" "Kevin Brown," David said, his voice dropping even lower. "He looked at the wall 6 months ago, but he didn't get away like we did." A chill ran down my back. "What happened to him?" "Nobody knows for sure. He never came back to work. His car was found abandoned on Highway 14 the next morning, about 5 miles from here. Keys still in the ignition, driver's door open." David paused, picking at a loose thread on his shirt sleeve. "They never found him." I tried to process this information. Kevin had seen what I'd seen, but he hadn't escaped. The pale creature with those terrible black eyes had taken him. And now I understood why Rebecca had been so insistent about the rules, why she'd made me repeat them back to her during my orientation. "The rules aren't jokes," I said. "No," David agreed. "They're not jokes." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this knowledge settling between us. Through the thin walls of the break room, I could hear the familiar sounds of the gas station, the hum of the refrigerators, the coffee machine starting its morning brew cycle. "So what now?" I finally asked. "Do I quit? Do I pretend I never saw it?" David leaned back in his chair, considering. "That's up to you. Rebecca will be in later. She'll probably talk to you about it." He stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. For what it's worth, I'm glad you made it out. Not everyone does. He left me sitting alone in the break room, staring at the wall. A normal wall, with peeling paint and water stains in the corner. I thought about Kevin Brown, about his empty car on the side of the highway. I thought about the rules, written in Rebecca's neat handwriting, rules that I now knew were deadly serious. And I thought about the dog, somehow getting into the locked station while I was gone, leaving those muddy prints on the floor. What had it been looking for? What had it found? I left the gas station that morning with my head spinning. The conversation with David kept replaying in my mind. Kevin Brown's empty car on the highway, the thing in the wall that had reached for both of us, the rules that weren't jokes, but survival instructions. I drove home in a daze, barely seeing the road ahead. My apartment felt too quiet when I got there. I took a long shower, trying to wash away the memory of those black eyes watching me from inside the wall. I told myself I should quit. Any reasonable person would walk away after what I'd seen. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was now part of something bigger than myself. The gas station wasn't just a job anymore. It was something else, something important. David had come back after his encounter. Rebecca had worked there for 15 years. There had to be a reason. By evening, I knew I was going back. I couldn't explain why, even to myself. It was like a hook had been set somewhere deep inside me, pulling me back to that lonely building on Highway 14. This is insane, I said out loud as I got dressed for my shift. My voice sounded strange in the empty apartment. You saw a monster come through a wall. You should be running in the opposite direction. But I wasn't running. I was putting on my uniform vest, checking my pockets for my keys, and heading out the door like it was any other workday. The drive to the station seemed shorter than usual. The sun was setting as I pulled into the gravel lot, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. From the outside, the place looked completely normal. Just a small gas station in the middle of nowhere, its windows glowing with fluorescent light. Rebecca was inside, counting the register. She looked up when I walked in, her expression giving nothing away. You came back, she said. Yeah. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. David told me what happened last night. I waited for more. Questions, reprimands, maybe even firing me, but she just went back to counting bills. When she finished, she closed the register and made a note on her clipboard. The first time is always the hardest, she said finally. Seeing what's behind the veil. Most people can't handle it. Did you look? I asked. At the wall? Rebecca's eyes met mine. We all look eventually. The smart ones run away after. The rest of us... She shrugged. We come back, like you did. She gathered her things and headed for the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. Be careful tonight. Follow the rules. All of them. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the store. I locked the door behind her and started my usual routine, checking inventory, wiping down counters, making fresh coffee. The familiar tasks helped calm my nerves. The hours passed quietly. A few customers came and went. A woman buying milk and bread, a teenager filling his car with gas, an old man who spent 20 minutes browsing magazines before buying a pack of gum. By 11 o'clock, the highway was empty again. I found myself glancing at the back wall more often than necessary, though I knew the creature only appeared after midnight. The wall looked completely normal. Just beige paint, safety posters, and the employee schedule. At 11:25, I was organizing the candy display when headlights swept across the front windows. A sleek black car pulled up to the front of the store rather than the gas pumps. The engine shut off, and a man stepped out. Even from a distance, I could tell this wasn't an ordinary customer. He wore a blue suit, not navy or dark blue, but a vibrant, almost electric blue that seemed to catch the light in unusual ways. His movements were precise as he walked to the door, each step measured and deliberate. My heart rate picked up. Rule 3. When the man in the blue suit comes in, serve him quickly and don't try to make conversation. The bell chimed as he entered. Up close, his suit looked even more striking, perfectly pressed without a single wrinkle, the fabric catching the fluorescent light with an almost metallic sheen. His face was unremarkable. Neither handsome nor ugly, neither young nor old. It was the kind of face you might forget immediately after seeing it. He approached the counter with the same measured steps. His shoes made no sound on the linoleum floor. "Black coffee," he said. His voice was clear and calm, with no accent I could place. I turned to the coffee station and grabbed a paper cup. As I poured the coffee, I noticed something odd in the polished surface of the coffee pot. The reflection of the store behind me was clear, but where the man should have been standing, there was nothing, just empty space. My hand trembled slightly as I snapped a lid onto the cup. I turned and placed it on the counter, careful not to make eye contact. $2, I said. He placed exact change on the counter. I put it in the register, still avoiding looking directly at him. He picked up the coffee but didn't drink it. For a long moment, he just stood there, and I could feel his eyes on me even though I was staring intently at the register. "You're doing well, Thomas," he said finally. The sound of my name in his mouth sent a chill through me. I hadn't been wearing a name tag. "The rules," he continued. "They're important, more important than you realize." I looked up then, unable to help myself. His eyes were pale blue, almost colorless, and they held mine with unsettling intensity. "This station sits on a thin spot," he said. "A place where barriers between worlds grow weak. The rules aren't just for your safety. They maintain those barriers." I wanted to ask questions, dozens of them, but Rule 3 was clear about not making conversation. I remained silent. "You've seen what waits on the other side," he said. "What tries to come through. The wall is just one weak point. There are others." He glanced toward the payphones, then back to me. "You're doing important work here, Thomas. More important than you know." He turned and walked to the door, his movements still measured and precise. But at the threshold, he paused and looked back. "The thing from the wall," he said. "It knows your face now. Be careful." Then he was gone, the door closing silently behind him. I watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away, the taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood frozen behind the counter, replaying his words in my mind. A thin spot. Barriers between worlds. The thing from the wall knows my face now. For the next hour, I moved through my tasks like a sleepwalker. I stocked shelves, cleaned the coffee station, and checked the coolers, all while turning over the blue-suited man's warning in my mind. At 1:45, I locked the pumps as required by Rule 1. From the front window, I watched the last lights on the pumps go dark, leaving only the fluorescent glow of the store to push back against the night. Time crept by. The payphones remained silent. The back wall stayed normal, just paint and posters. But something had changed. The air in the store felt heavier somehow, charged with anticipation. At 2, I was sitting behind the counter when movement outside caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just shadows cast by the building, or maybe headlights from a distant car on the highway. But as I peered through the front windows, I realized what I was seeing. Figures, dozens of them, standing just beyond the reach of the parking lot lights. They were human-shaped, but indistinct, like silhouettes without sources, darker patches against the night. They didn't move. They just stood there, watching the store. Watching me. I remembered the blue-suited man's words about maintaining barriers, about this place sitting on a thin spot between worlds. These figures, whatever they were, couldn't come closer. The rules were keeping them at bay. Cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I moved away from the window, retreating behind the counter. Minutes passed, and when I gathered the courage to look again, the figures were still there, still watching, still waiting. At 2:30, a familiar scratching sound came from the front door. The German Shepherd had returned, its paws dragging against the glass. But this time, instead of begging to be let in, it kept looking over its shoulder, back toward the side of the building. Then it would turn to me, whining urgently. "I can't let you in," I said through the glass. "It's against the rules." The dog barked once, then ran to the side of the building before returning to scratch at the door again. Its behavior was frantic, desperate. That's when I realized it wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to tell me something. I moved to the side window, the one that looked out toward the back of the property. The dog followed on the outside, still whining and glancing behind it. Through the window, I could just make out the rear corner of the building. Something moved there, something pale that caught the faint glow of the security light. My breath caught as I recognized it, the creature from the wall. The same bone-white skin, the same elongated limbs. But now it was outside, moving around the perimeter of the building, trailing those two long fingers against the bricks. It was testing the boundaries, I realized, looking for a way in. The dog barked again, louder this time, still looking between me and the creature. It was warning me. Had it been warning me all along? I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadow figures beyond the parking lot. The creature circling the building. The man in the blue suits warning about maintaining barriers. This gas station wasn't just a convenience store on a lonely stretch of highway. It was a fortress, a guardhouse, a last line of defense against whatever waited on the other side. And somehow, I had become its guardian. The dog continued to pace outside, its claws clicking against the pavement as it kept watch. The shadow figures remained at the edge of the light, not approaching, but not retreating. And somewhere out of sight, the pale creature continued its circuit of the building, searching for weakness. I stayed behind the counter, watching the clock tick toward morning, understanding for the first time what Rebecca had meant when she said the rules were for survival. Not just my survival, but everyone's. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, I noticed the shadow figures at the edge of the parking lot starting to fade. They didn't move or retreat. They simply became less substantial, like ink dissolving in water, until they were gone altogether. The pale creature that had been circling the building made one final pass, trailing those impossibly long fingers against the brick before slipping away into the darkness behind the dumpsters. The German Shepherd watched it go, then turned to look at me through the glass one last time. Its eyes held mine for a long moment before it trotted off into the tall grass beyond the lot. I stood at the window, my legs aching from hours of tension, and watched the darkness give way to morning. The sun wasn't visible yet, but its approach had scattered the night and whatever came with it. For the first time in hours, I took a deep breath. The highway stretched empty in both directions, no headlights breaking the stillness. I made a fresh pot of coffee, more for the familiar comfort of the routine than because I needed the caffeine. My hands shook less now as I measured the grounds and filled the water reservoir. While the coffee brewed, I walked the perimeter of the store, checking for any signs of the night's visitors. There were no marks on the windows where the dog had scratched, no handprints on the brick where the pale creature had touched. If not for the muddy paw print still visible on the floor near the front door, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. I was pouring myself a cup of coffee when headlights appeared on the highway. A familiar sedan pulled into the lot and parked in the space marked Manager. Rebecca stepped out, clutching her usual clipboard and a thick manila folder. Her face gave nothing away as she walked to the door. "Morning," she said as she entered, glancing around the store with a practiced eye. She spotted the paw prints immediately. The dog was back. It wasn't trying to get in, I said. It was warning me. Rebecca paused, her hand halfway to hanging up her coat. Warning you about what? The pale thing from the wall. It was outside, moving around the building. I swallowed hard. And there were others. Shadow people standing at the edge of the lot, just watching. She finished hanging her coat and turned to face me. Instead of surprise or disbelief, her expression showed something else. Assessment. She was measuring my reaction, gauging my state of mind. "Sit down, Thomas," she said, gesturing to the small table in the corner that customers sometimes used. "We need to talk." I followed her to the table, bringing my coffee. My stomach twisted with a mix of dread and anticipation. After everything I'd seen, after the man in the blue suit's cryptic warnings, I knew this conversation would change things forever. Rebecca set her clipboard and folder on the table and took a seat. She looked tired, not just from an early morning, but with a bone-deep weariness I recognized from my own reflection. "I was the night clerk here for 15 years, she said without preamble. "Started when I was 22, not much younger than you. Back then, a man named Gerald Wilcox was the manager. He gave me the rules, just like I gave them to you." She opened the manila folder and pulled out a sheet of yellowed paper, sliding it across the table to me. It was a handwritten list of rules, the handwriting different from Rebecca's, but the content identical to what she'd given me during orientation. "I broke Rule 4 my first week," she continued. "Curiosity got the better of me. I saw what you saw, that thing in the wall. I ran, just like you did." A thin smile touched her lips. "And just like you, I came back." "Why?" I asked. The question had been bothering me since I realized I couldn't stay away. Why come back to this place? Hard to explain. It's like once you know what's out there, once you've seen behind the curtain, you can't go back to not knowing. She tapped the folder with one finger. This station was built in 1987, specifically at this location. "Do you know why?" I shook my head. "Because something happened here in 1986. There was a tear, a rip in whatever separates our world from others. Things started coming through. Local farmers reported livestock disappearing. Hikers went missing. Strange lights appeared in the night sky." She pulled out several newspaper clippings from the folder, headlines describing unusual events in the area. "Then they built this place, right on top of the tear, to contain it." I thought about what the man in the blue suit had said about thin spots and barriers. Who built it? I don't know exactly. Government maybe, or someone else. Rebecca shrugged. "All I know is that this isn't just a gas station. It's a fortress, a seal. The rules, the structure itself, it all works together to maintain barriers between our world and what lies beyond." The coffee in my cup had gone cold. I pushed it aside, too unsettled to drink it. "And the man in the blue suit? Who is he?" "A representative. He checks on us, makes sure we're following the rules. He represents whoever or whatever established the barriers in the first place." She leaned forward. "He doesn't show up for everyone. The fact that he spoke to you means something." Outside, the sky had lightened to a pale blue. The morning looked perfectly ordinary, just another day beginning on Highway 14. It seemed impossible that hours earlier, shadow figures had stood watching from the darkness. "The people who work here," Rebecca continued, "they're chosen carefully. People who can follow rules without asking too many questions. People who will accept the unexplainable." "Like me," I said. She nodded. "Like you. There's a reason the pay is better than any other gas station job in 3 counties. Hazard pay, you might call it." I thought about what David had told me about Kevin Brown, his empty car found on the highway, the driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. I thought about the pale creature circling the building last night, testing for weaknesses. "What happened to Kevin?" I asked. Really? Rebecca's face tightened. He broke Rule 4, like you did, like I did. But he didn't run, or couldn't. By the time David came for the morning shift, there was no sign of Kevin, just an empty store with the register open. She paused. We found his car later that day. And the others? You said everyone looks eventually. Some run and never come back. Some run but return, like us. And some... She trailed off, letting the silence fill in what she didn't say. And the dog? I asked. What's its role in all this? I don't know everything, Rebecca admitted. The dog appears when something's wrong, when the barriers are weakening or something's trying to break through. It's never attacked anyone or tried to get in when the doors are locked. It just watches, warns. She pulled another document from the folder, a contract with the gas station's corporate logo at the top. I need to give you a choice, Thomas. The company policy. She laid it on the table between us. You can quit now. Walk away. We have methods to help you forget the worst of what you've seen. Not everything, but enough that you could go back to a normal life. I stared at the contract, trying to process what she was saying. Or you stay. Become a full guardian. Learn everything I can teach you about maintaining the barriers that keep this place, and by extension, our world, safe from what lurks in the spaces between. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. I could walk away. Forget the pale creature with its black eyes and needle teeth. Forget the shadow figures and the warning of the man in the blue suit. Go back to a normal life with normal problems. I looked out the window at the empty highway stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Kevin Brown had vanished without a trace. Somewhere out there, other clerks had either fled or disappeared. And somewhere beyond our world, things waited to break through. But I also thought about David, who had stayed despite his fear. About Rebecca, who had worked night shifts for 15 years before promoting herself to day manager. About the man in the blue suit, who had told me I was doing important work. More important than I knew. In that moment, looking out at the ordinary morning with its ordinary sunshine, I made my decision to stay and learn everything Rebecca could teach me about maintaining the barriers that kept the world safe from what lurked in the spaces between.